Please welcome to the stage Julie Hyman from Yahoo Finance and our esteemed panel.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and let me introduce the aforementioned esteemed panel that is with me here today, and we're here to discuss financial inclusion and advancing opportunities for entrepreneurship. With me today, starting from the end here, we have Rick Wade, Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We have Maurice Jones, CEO of 110, and we have Gaston Taratuta, I think I did that pretty well, founder and CEO of Olive. We practiced backstage. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today to discuss this important topic, not just for here in the US when we talk about inclusion with entrepreneurship, but globally as well. I actually want to start in the middle with Maurice, because what your organization is doing is quite interesting in terms of trying to foster leadership, minority leadership in the United States. You guys are a relatively new organization. Talk to me about how you're tackling the issue.
Sure. Well, thanks for letting me be with you. Look, we're focusing on making sure that the pathway to middle class in America is one that's open to more people than those who have four-year degrees, right? So we're focused on making sure that access to living wage jobs and careers are there for, and particularly in our case, black talent who don't yet have four-year degrees. And so I'll give you a data point on why it's so important for us. If you look at our country today, you look at all jobs that pay $60,000 and above, on paper, 79% of them require that you have a four-year degree just to compete for the job. If you look at all jobs that pay $40,000 and above, on paper, 71% require you have a four-year degree. And yet, 76% of black talent in the workforce do not yet have a four-year degree. And by the way, that number is 66% for all white talent. So what we're trying to do is to create a movement in corporate America that says skills are first. That the whole talent journey, the biggest factor of success ought to be skills, and you can come by skills through a number of pathways: work experience, military experience, four-year degree, two-year degree. That's what we're about, and by doing that, our aspiration is to make sure that more talent across our demographic spectrum get a chance to earn their way into the middle class.
Rick, you must have an interesting perspective on that as well, in terms of your members, which are businesses. I imagine that, Maurice, the job gets a little easier at a time when it's tough to hire good people, right? And so we have seen employers get more flexible in terms, perhaps, of standards, of requirements for who they're going to hire. Is that what you're seeing among your members?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the U.S. Chamber, the world's largest business organization representing some 3 million or more companies, we see this every day. I think there's nothing more important right now than creating pathways to economic opportunity. And part of the way to do that is through having a good job. But I think it's important not to stop at just the job. This conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it has to extend to the corporate boardroom. It's got to extend to C-suites. And so we're leading a lot of work across the private sector in that regard. And then the other piece is, how do we grow and strengthen the nation's 8 million minority-owned businesses? Is extremely important. So it's not just about jobs, but how do we inspire the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs? Some data points from, as a result of the pandemic, the Institute for Economic Research reported that 41% of black-owned businesses in America closed as a result of the pandemic. And that is absolutely unconscionable. It's astonishing. So we have to solve for that, and I'm thrilled what the private sector is doing to help create pathways and to support the growth of the nation's small and minority-owned firms.
So let's talk to an entrepreneur also to get some insight into this. Gaston, you are EY's World Entrepreneur of the Year. What advice do you give to people who are looking to start businesses, particularly people who are not necessarily coming from traditional backgrounds with a 4-year degree, for example, or how do people get creative when they're looking to start businesses?
So I like to, well, thank you for inviting me. And I like to start giving good news. You know, I remember my grandma used to tell me, if you want to be someone, you need to study. And then I did the math, and I said, what, I do elementary school, high school, college, graduate, and then basically you spend 17 years and to enter into the labor force, right? I think that today is not what you know, it's what you can do for me. And that in the digital world that I live, my best advice is to find careers, find a space where I wouldn't use the word easy. In a shorter period of time, for example, at Asalef, we are certifying people for free on how to use Twitter as advertising platform, how to use Facebook, Meta, as advertising platform, Snapchat, TikTok. People know how to use this platform, but not as B2B. Now, suddenly in Myanmar, $1,500 GDP economy per capita, $120 a month. So you can see that other people has bigger problems. I can educate someone in Myanmar, or in Laos, or in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I'm from, and suddenly that person can be servicing a client in the UK. So I want to challenge the audience here and my colleagues to think about that this digital world is insulated to recession, inflation, or stagflation, whatever Asian you want to use. Why? Because the transfer from offline GDP to digital GDP will not stop. And it needs a lot of talent out there, from people selling products and services, right, Elise, to e-commerce infrastructure, to people who understand digital marketing, people who understand digital payments, and logistics. I'll give you one simple example. I operate in a $40 trillion GDP economy. In the US already, digital commerce is about 10% of the GDP to 12%, depending on the research you read. This is $2 trillion economy. Now, in the markets we operate, it's 2 to 3%. Here is a $4 trillion transfer, where the economies grow or not, from off to on. What do we need? We need 500,000 people in the world who understand digital infrastructure, digital communication, everything when it comes to delivery and payments. You don't need to study 15 years. You can put someone in the labor market in 5 to 6 months.
I think maybe the likes of Meta and Snap would argue a little bit about being resistant to a recession and ad downturn, but that's a debate for another day. I report on this stuff all day, but that's a debate for another day. So when you're looking at preparing the folks you're talking about for getting into the workforce as small businesses, as entrepreneurs, Rick, I'll take this back to you. How are you focused on getting them, particularly in this digital economy, which is still growing, obviously, even if it is growing at a different rate than it was?
Well, I think for small businesses, I mean, either you're a tech company or tech-enabled. I mean, I don't know how you compete without competing and understanding, as my colleague mentioned, the digital economy. You think about, 95% of the world's consumers live outside of our borders. This is how we connect now with those consumers. What a wonderful opportunity for small and minority firms to sell their products and services through this digital economy. We just launched a national initiative called Advance Africa, which is looking at opportunities across the continent. And we're doing this around the world. We're hearing from leaders and heads of states and companies globally about the importance of connecting SMEs to opportunities, not just within country, but to each other. So I think the future looks really, really bright, considering the digital environment that we operate in and the opportunities to sell their products and services across the globe.
Maurice, I'm also curious, when you look at it not just from a training perspective, not just from a matching up employer and employee perspective, but also from a sort of cultural perspective in terms of people seeing the opportunities that are available for them and believing that they can actually take advantage of those opportunities, whether it be getting on an executive track or starting a new business. What do you think needs to be done to work on that issue, if it indeed is, it even is an issue?
It is an issue. Look, I think there are a number of things. One is we need more mentors and sponsors for talent, right? And you know, they say if you can't be what you can't see. We need more of all races and backgrounds, but we need proximity to the talent, right? To help talent navigate culture, but also to help folks, frankly, to be as confident as they need to be to take the risk necessary. So I think the mentorship and the sponsorship is critical. No question, another piece of it is making sure that people do have the opportunity to upskill and reskill, right? People do have the opportunity for apprenticeships and learning on the job. All of those things are needed. And then, look, from a cultural standpoint, we have to make sure that in addition to what the talent itself needs to do, that our companies and our corporate culture is working on the transformations that we need to make there with our leaders, particularly our people leaders and our hiring managers, to change and to get at the biases that we bring from everyday life into the corporation.
Well, as I mentioned before, some of this is opportunistic, right? You need workers right now. And so to your point, Gaston, you guys are looking everywhere. You're looking into different markets.
Yes.
What are the criteria when you're looking for people to partner with or to work for you when it comes to, I mean, is enthusiasm a big component of it? It seems to be at least part of it.
I'm very enthusiastic because, I mean, I'm operating outside the US. And, you know, the bad news is that 1 billion people accounts for half of the global GDP. And there are 7 billion people. So you're talking about $60,000 GDP per capita versus $6,000. Within those $6,000, you're talking about people with $15,000 GDP a year, another one with $1,200. For example, Myanmar, right? So you're talking about different varieties of economies. Now, capital is really wild. We learn about this in every single, you know, I mean, marketing. Marketing in developed economies is 1% of the GDP. In undeveloped economies, 0.3%. So we are basically here enabling digital marketing in emerging countries in the world, about 100 countries in the world, $40 trillion GDP economies, where we see that it is, I gotta tell you, between 7 and 8 years behind, depending on the region you go. So there's still a lot to grow, a lot of opportunity to give accessibility to people, because this is important. You guys, we have here everything, politicians, policymakers, etc. This is a social equalizer. This is not democracy. Everybody, you know, there is 2 billion, water exists for how long? Millions of years. There's still 2 billion people without accessibility to water. Internet exists only 50 years, and it's only 3 billion people with accessibility. So you know why there is not enough water for everybody? Because it's not a great business. But this is a great business, so it's a social equalizer. This hardware, he can be making, not to use as an example, $1 billion a year. We are here
Congratulations.
I was going to say,
if he lives in California, he'll pay 50% taxes, $500 million, right? If you come to Florida, we get you deal at 32 points. But what I want to say, he can make $1 billion, be here in 7 and 52. I can make 10,000 a year, and when we send an email, we use the same antenna. There is no differentiation, like in education, like in clothing, like in capital accessibility. So this social equalizer, which is hardware and connectivity, is happening around the world. And I'll give you a very simple example. we know many companies in countries like Estonia, Lithuania, I mean the Balkans, where an entrepreneur from a 30 billion GDP, you know what is a 30 billion GDP economy? It's like one neighborhood in New York. Suddenly is creating a product of a service to compete in a $22 trillion GDP economy. That's what you were mentioning before, like accessing the frontiers, right? The entire world. And that's what I would encourage entrepreneurs to focus on. Build products that have global legs.
Because this makes it sound like the barriers to entry in the US are actually more difficult in some cases when you're comparing them with some of these markets you're talking about and the opportunities, perhaps, in some ways. Rick, to come back to you, as I think back on the past couple of years, we really started accelerating this conversation around diversity and inclusion 2 years ago, give or take, really intensifying it. How do you think we've done so far with the progress that we have made?
Well, I think we've done very well in the conversation.
Right, that's my
right?
point.
The question is there action?
Right.
Is it sustainability? After the murder of George Floyd, we convened 7,000 CEOs and government and other business leaders around a real conversation about equality of opportunity in America. And, I think the challenge is to move from conversation to real investment. And from that, we put forth some policy prescriptions that we're fighting for every day. And I wanted to mention the policy side because I think that's a very important part as well to advancing opportunities. There's a role for the private sector, but there's also a role for our government to advance policies. For example, one of the #1 challenges facing small and minority firms is access to capital. There is a role, I believe, for the government in areas like government contracting. We're leading efforts around getting more SMEs connected to corporate supply chains. So those are very tangible initiatives and efforts that I'm excited that we are making progress. I think and hope to believe that certainly following the height of awareness after the murder of George Floyd, it wasn't just a moment, but it really is a movement. It's a movement across the country, across the world. And we're seeing some results. So we're making some progress, but we still have a long way to go.
I mean, I have to say, I interview CEOs on a daily, weekly basis. And obviously the progress there to get diversity in the upper ranks, it's slow, right? It's slow. Maurice, what about you? What's your assessment? Now, granted, as I mentioned, your organization is younger, but you've been working on these types of efforts.
Yeah. So look, I'm going to stipulate I'm a naive optimist, right? I actually think we're at a moment that I haven't seen before in the country. And in my lifetime now, I'm still young. I want you all to remember that. But look, we've got 75 companies who have committed unambiguously to hiring and promoting black talent who don't yet have 4-year degrees. And in 1 year's time, they hired 50,000 black talent without 4-year degrees, hired and promoted, right? So I actually think we're definitely in a new chapter. We've got to sustain this chapter long enough to really, really transform the country and communities and companies, but I've not seen this kind of commitment unambiguously in my lifetime.
And the numbers are impressive that you just cited as well, that it's
They're
not just
the
a
beginning.
commitment.
Yeah, no, this is
that
real,
there's
tangible.
stuff happening.
Yes, sir.
Gaston, I'll end with you. We just have a moment left here because you, with the more international focus, it sounds like you are also pretty optimistic about the opportunities that you're seeing for entrepreneurs around the world.
Yes, I think if you wanted to compete with Coca-Cola 20 years ago and you want to build a soda business from Estonia, it's very complex if you want to be a global company. Now, if you create a great game, a great software product, there is a lot of invisible talent in the world, in the US as well, with access to capital. Now you can compete because your product has legs through the internet, something that before did not exist. So I say someone in Buenos Aires, a bike shop in Croatia, is building a specific type of bike for racing. that person has the ability to reach the world. Now, I want to say something about where you guys were commenting on. You know, I'm come from minority, Argentinian Jewish, that came to the US for very little. I'm a minority as well. And the idea is an and. You can ask policymakers to do things for inclusion, but I will encourage people and minority groups to take their own tools and arms and go for what they deserve, because nobody's going to give you anything unless you go for. And with that, I just want to send the message that the world is out there needing a lot of thousands and thousands of professionals that understand the digital world. A small business in the US need to understand digital because that's a sales channel for them. And it's a huge opportunity behind the internet.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Rick Wade, Maurice Jones, Gaston Taratuta.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.